Jerusalem, the year is 30. Morning has come, but the cold still clings to the stone. You are standing in a narrow street where the walls rise close on either side, rough and pale in the early light. If you reached out your hands, you could almost touch both at once. Somewhere nearby, bread is baking. The smell drifts through dust, animals, sweat, smoke, and the breath of thousands already awake. A donkey groans, sandals scrape, merchants call, a child cries. The city is alive before the sun has fully claimed it. Then you hear something else, a harder rhythm, slower, heavier, iron striking stone with deliberate force. Your stomach tightens before your mind catches up. Roman sandals, studded soles, military pace. You do not turn around. Not here. Not in Jerusalem, under occupation. Not when one wrong glance can be mistaken for defiance. Not when a soldier can stop you, shame you, strike you, take your money, drag you away, or simply decide that today your life is worth less than his temper. So you keep your eyes forward. That is how people survive in a city ruled by fear. Not by courage in the way stories like to tell it. By caution, by silence, by learning exactly when to lower your gaze and when to disappear into the crowd. For the next 30 minutes, forget the soft and polished version of the Holy Land. Forget painted pageants and harmless Bible scenes. This is Jerusalem beneath Rome, a sacred city under foreign boots. And if you want to understand the world of Jesus, you must first learn what it felt like to walk these streets and know that power was always only a few steps behind you. But before we go any farther, we need to strip away one of the biggest myths people carry into this world. If your image of Roman power comes from films, you are probably seeing polished legionaries in shining armor, red cloaks flowing behind them, marching in perfect lines like a machine made of iron and discipline. It is a powerful image. It is also the wrong one for Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. The men you would have seen in Judea were usually not the famous elite legions of empire. They were auxiliary troops, support forces, non-citizen soldiers recruited from territories Rome had already conquered and bent to its will. Their armor was simpler. Their gear was less glorious. Chainmail instead of the polished fantasy people remember. Oval shields instead of the iconic rectangular ones. Spears, short swords, practical helmets, and the hard habits of men used to enforcing order on restless ground. And here is where the occupation becomes even more bitter. Many of these men were not distant Romans from the heart of Italy. Many were Syrians. Many were Samaritans. That matters. The soldiers walking Jerusalem's streets were not merely foreign enforcers from some faraway capital. In Jewish eyes, many of them came from peoples bound up in old hatred, old rivalry, old contempt. The occupation was not just political, it was deeply personal. Every patrol carried not only Roman authority, but the memory of regional enemies, now backed by imperial steel. So when you heard those iron-studded footsteps behind you, you were not just hearing the empire, you were hearing men who may already have despised your people before they ever put on a Roman belt. That is what made daily life so tense. The danger was not abstract. It had a face, a voice, an accent, a hand, already resting near the hilt of a sword. And above all of them stood the officers who shaped this fear into a system. Professional men, career soldiers, centurions who knew how to maintain peace by making sure everyone understood exactly how much violence they were permitted to use. And the clearest symbol of that system was not a man. It was a fortress. Rising over the northwest corner of the Temple Mount stood Fortress Antonia, built to dominate the most sacred space in Jerusalem. It was not placed there by accident. It was positioned with purpose. Towers, walls, stairways, stone, height, and visibility. Rome understood something every empire understands sooner or later. If you want to control a people, you do not merely occupy their streets, you watch their worship. From Antonia, soldiers could look down into the temple courts themselves, pause there for a moment, and feel what that meant. This was the center of Jewish life, the place of sacrifice, prayer, purification, memory, covenant, identity, the place where heaven and earth were believed to meet. And yet even there, above the movement of priests, pilgrims, merchants, and worshippers, Roman eyes remained fixed on the crowd. Helmets caught the sunlight. Spears flashed above the holy courts. Even in prayer, you were not unwatched. That was the point. This was architecture turned into psychological warfare. Rome did not need to speak every hour of the day. The fortress spoke for them. It told every person entering the temple, that sacred space did not mean free space. It told every pilgrim that devotion happened under surveillance. It told every heart in Jerusalem that the empire stood above even this. And during the great festivals, that pressure intensified. Passover changed the city. Jerusalem swelled far beyond its ordinary size as pilgrims poured in from every direction. Families arrived with offerings, traders filled the streets, languages overlapped, smoke rose, animals cried out. Crowds thickened around the temple until the air itself seemed alive with movement and tension. Under those conditions, Rome did not relax. Rome reinforced. More soldiers, more patrols, more watching. Because Passover was not just a religious celebration, it was a dangerous season of memory. It reminded the Jewish people of deliverance, of liberation, of a God who once broke the power of an empire. That is exactly the kind of story occupying powers learned to fear. So while the people remembered Exodus, the garrison prepared for unrest. And if anything went wrong, the response could be immediate. The book of Acts gives us a glimpse of how quickly that machinery moved. When Paul was seized in the temple courts years later, word reached the Roman commander at once. Soldiers rushed down from the fortress into the chaos below. In moments, the situation was under military control. That is how efficient the system was. You did not need to attack Rome for Rome to make itself felt. You only needed to gather, to stir attention, to stand in the wrong place when a crowd began to shift. The fortress was always there, looming over sacrifice and song, reminding Jerusalem that military power did not wait outside the holy city. It stood over its heart. And if the fortress represented Rome watching from above, the courtroom represented Rome deciding from below. Fear in Jerusalem was not sustained by soldiers alone. It was sustained by law, by procedure, by titles that sounded administrative but carried the full weight of death. For generations, many people imagined Pontius Pilate as little more than a reluctant official trapped in a political dispute. That image is too small for the man and far too gentle for the system he served. Pilate was not merely a paper-shuffling bureaucrat. He was the prefect of Judea, a governor with military authority, a man invested with what Rome called the right of the sword. That meant something very simple and very chilling. He held legal power over life and death. So when Jesus was brought before him at dawn, this was not an awkward meeting between a spiritual teacher and an uncomfortable civil servant. It was an encounter between a Jewish prisoner and the armed representative of empire. Every question Pilate asked carried force behind it. Every pause mattered. Every sentence had the shadow of execution hanging behind it. This is also why the Jewish authorities needed him. The Sanhedrin had religious authority. They could investigate blasphemy. They could judge disputes under Jewish law. They could condemn a man in the eyes of the people, but they could not carry out a Roman execution. They could not nail a body to wood beside a public road and let it hang there as a warning. Only Rome could do that. Only Rome could take a religious accusation and turn it into an imperial death sentence. That is what made the Praetorium so terrifying. It was the place where local conflict passed into imperial machinery. A charge brought there did not stay theological for long. Rome translated religious unrest into political threat, and political threat was something Rome knew how to answer with brutal clarity. Crucifixion was not simply punishment, it was theater. It was law performed as spectacle. A body broken in public told the crowd exactly who held power and exactly what happened to anyone who challenged it. Rome did not execute in secret when it wanted obedience. It executed where people could see. So imagine what it meant when Jesus stood before Pilate. He was not facing a misunderstanding. He was facing a system designed to crush any rival claim to kingship, loyalty, or truth. Rome could tolerate many gods, many customs, many local traditions. What it could not tolerate was a kingdom it did not control. That is why the legal layer of Roman rule was so frightening. A soldier could insult you, a patrol could intimidate you, but a governor could erase you with a word, and the law would call it order. And once Rome had judged you, the humiliation was often only beginning. And once Rome had judged you, the humiliation was often only beginning. The empire did not rely on pain alone. Pain could break a body. Humiliation could break something deeper. It could strip away dignity, identity, even the last fragile sense that a condemned man was still human in the eyes of those around him. That is why the moments before a crucifixion mattered so much. In the stone-paved spaces where soldiers gathered, waited, and passed time between assignments, cruelty could become routine. Boredom and violence, are a dangerous combination in any army. Under Rome, they often fed each other. A prisoner was not always treated as a person awaiting sentence. He could become entertainment, a prop, a target for a ritual of contempt. There are traces in the historical record of soldiers turning mockery into a kind of game, a cruel performance built around the idea of false kingship. Dress the condemned man in scraps of finery. Give him a mock symbol of authority, pretend to honor him, then laugh. Strike, spit, bow in ridicule, tear it all away. What begins as theater ends in blood. Now read the Passion story with that world in mind. The robe placed on Jesus, the crown forced onto his head, the taunting salute, "Hail, King of the Jews." The kneeling, not in worship, but in scorn. The blows, the spit, the calculated mockery of a man accused of kingship by soldiers who served the strongest kingdom on earth. That scene becomes even darker when you realize how familiar it may have felt to them. They were not inventing humiliation in the moment. They were drawing from the culture of empire, where power enjoyed parody before execution, where the weak could be staged and degraded so that the strong could laugh one last time before killing them. To Rome, this was useful. A crucifixion did not merely remove a problem, it sent a message. And the message was sharper if the victim could be made ridiculous before he died. If a so-called king could be dressed up, mocked, beaten, and displayed, then every dream of resistance died with him. That is what made the treatment of Jesus so chilling. Rome was not only punishing a man, Rome was mocking an entire hope, mocking the very idea that Israel could have a king Rome did not appoint, control, or destroy. And yet even here, in the center of ridicule, another layer of Roman power was already at work. Because long before the nails, long before the cross, the empire had learned to rule by reaching into the pocket of every ordinary person in Jerusalem. Rome had learned that the surest way to stay inside a conquered city was not only through fortresses, courts, and crosses. It was through ordinary exchange, through the market, through debt, through taxes, through the small, cold object that passed from one hand to another all day long, a coin. Imagine holding a silver denarius in your palm. It is not large, it is not heavy, but it carries the weight of empire. Stamped on its face is the image of Tiberius Caesar, the ruler whose authority stretches across provinces, ports, roads, armies, and courts. And around that image runs an inscription that says far more than a simple name ever could. Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. That phrase mattered. For a devout Jew, this was not merely state currency, it was a daily offense. A graven image pressed into silver, a political claim wrapped in theological language, a little metal declaration that the ruler of Rome stood close to the realm of the gods. And yet if you lived under Roman rule, you still had to touch it, use it, carry it, count it out, hand it over. This is what made Roman power so invasive. It did not remain at the edges of life. It entered the marketplace, the household, the field, the fishing boat, the workshop, the purse. It turned survival into participation. Even when a man hated the empire, he still had to function inside its system. And that system was expensive. Roman tribute drew from what people produced. Then came customs fees, tolls, transport charges, local levies, and the temple tax as well. Add religious obligations to imperial ones, and many families lived under a burden that pressed into every season of the year. Grain, fish, oil, labor, trade, land, all of it could be touched by obligation. Every harvest had hands waiting for it. Every transaction had someone standing beside it. Every household knew what it meant to lose a little more than it could afford. That is how desperation becomes normal. And between the people and the empire stood one of the most despised figures in Jewish society, the tax collector. These men did not simply gather revenue. They represented compromise with foreign rule. They handled Roman money all day. They worked within a structure known for abuse. They could collect what was required and then collect more, padding the total for personal gain. To many ordinary Jews, they were not just greedy men. They were collaborators, men who had decided that Caesar's silver mattered more than the suffering of their own people. Now feel the force of the trap set for Jesus when he was asked whether it was lawful to pay taxes to Caesar. It was a perfect snare. If he said no, he could be branded a rebel against Rome. If he said yes without qualification, he could be painted as a man willing to bless the emperor's claims and the system crushing his people. So, Jesus asked for the coin. That detail is easy to miss, Someone in that crowd had the coin ready. Someone standing in a religious confrontation was already carrying the image and inscription of empire. Jesus looked at the coin and said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." That was not surrender. It was separation. Caesar may stamp his image on silver, but Caesar does not stamp his image on the human soul. The coin may belong to the empire. Worship does not. Allegiance does not. What bears God's image belongs to God. And in Jerusalem, that distinction was not theoretical. It was the line between surviving under Rome and surrendering the deepest part of yourself to it. But there was one form of Roman power that could break into your day without warning, without trial, and without any need for accusation at all. You could be doing nothing wrong. You could be walking home from the market with food for your family. You could be tired, dusty, half thinking about supper, about children waiting at the door, about the little private concerns that make a human life feel like it still belongs to you. And then, in an instant, all of that could be interrupted by the voice of a soldier. A command, a gesture, the blunt touch of a spear shaft against your shoulder. Under Roman rule, there was a practice known as Angaria. The empire claimed the right to compel civilians to carry military loads for a fixed distance. No appeal, no negotiation, no polite refusal. If a soldier chose you, your time was no longer your own. Your strength was no longer your own. For that stretch of road, your body became another tool of empire. Picture the moment. You set down your basket. You bend toward a pack that was never meant for you. Leather straps, weapons, rations, stakes, cloak, personal gear. A dead weight pressing into your hands and then into your back. And as you straighten, you feel not only the burden itself, but the humiliation attached to it. You are no longer a man on his own errand. You are an occupied person carrying the machinery of occupation. 1 Roman mile, not far enough to sound dramatic to modern ears, but long enough to be felt in the shoulders, in the neck, in the lower back, in the slow burn of anger you cannot safely speak. Long enough to remind you with every step that power does not always need a courtroom or a cross. Sometimes, it only needs to make you carry what belongs to your oppressor. This is what makes the words of Jesus so startling. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him too. For many readers today, that sounds like gentle advice about being helpful. In 1st century Judea, it sounded nothing like that. It sounded dangerous. It sounded disruptive. It sounded like a man taking a well-known instrument of humiliation and turning it inside out. The 1st mile belonged to Rome. That was the mile of coercion, the mile of insult, the mile where the empire proved it could interrupt your life and use your body. But the 2nd mile was different. The 2nd mile was no longer demanded. It was chosen, and that changed everything. A soldier knew the rules. He could compel 1 mile, not more. If you kept walking past the legal limit, the balance shifted. Suddenly, the man under orders was not you. It was him. He had to wonder what you were doing, why you were still carrying the pack, whether this strange act of willing endurance might bring trouble down on his own head. In a single sentence, Jesus transformed forced submission into moral agency. He did not deny the humiliation of the 1st mile. He exposed it. Then he showed his listeners how to take back the one thing Rome always tried to own, the freedom to choose who you would be beneath the weight. And once you understand that, you can see the deepest cruelty of Roman rule. The empire did not only want your obedience, it wanted to shape the world inside your head. It wanted to surround your life so completely that even your language, your symbols, and your sense of self began to bend beneath its weight. That is why the inscription above the cross matters so much. When Jesus was crucified, the charge placed over his head was written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Latin, Greek. That detail is easy to read past. It should not be. Hebrew, or more precisely the language of the Jewish people in their sacred life and inherited memory, carried the sound of scripture, prayer, family, blessing, lament, covenant, and promise. It was the language that tied the present generation to fathers, mothers, prophets, kings, psalms, exile, return, and hope. It was the language of belonging. Latin was something else entirely. Latin was the language of Roman command, the language of law, military authority, official verdicts, punishments, taxation, and imperial force. It sounded like orders. It sounded like bureaucracy sharpened into violence. It was the voice of the state when the state wanted to remind you that it could act on your body. And then there was Greek. Greek was the language of trade, travel, learning, and wider connection across the Eastern Mediterranean world. If you wanted to move beyond the boundaries of one town or one people, Greek opened doors. It carried influence, exchange, philosophy, ambition, and the future. Now place all three above the broken body of Jesus. Rome was not merely identifying a condemned man. Rome was sending a message in every direction, to the people of memory, to the people of power, to the people of the wider world. Your king hangs here. Your hope hangs here. Your claims about God, history, destiny, and identity all pass beneath the authority of empire. That is what makes the sign so brutal. It turns execution into communication. It declares that Rome can define the meaning of Jewish expectation in the language of worship, confirm the sentence in the language of law, and broadcast the humiliation in the language of civilization itself. This was more than death. It was narrative control. And that is always one of the final ambitions of empire, not just to conquer land, not just to extract wealth, but to name reality for everyone beneath it. Yet even here, at the place where Rome seemed to control the message, the life of Jesus was already beginning to expose a truth the empire could not finally master. And that is the point where the words of Jesus begin to sound less like gentle religious advice and more like a direct challenge to the logic of empire. It is easy to hear familiar lines from the Gospels and imagine them spoken into a calm and private world. But that was not the world he entered. Jesus spoke into a city watched by soldiers, drained by taxes, controlled by governors, and trained to live with humiliation as part of ordinary life. Every command he gave landed inside that pressure. Think of the words, "Love your enemies." For many modern listeners, that sounds like guidance for strained relationships, personal grudges, or social disagreement. In Jerusalem under Rome, it meant something far harsher. It meant the man with the spear, the patrol moving through the streets, the tax collector enriching himself through a system that kept families desperate, the officer who could strike, seize, or shame you without warning. To love such people was not sentimental. It was almost unthinkable. That is why the command feels divine. It does not arise from weakness. It arises from a kingdom that refuses to let hatred dictate the shape of the human soul, even under occupation. Then consider the words, "My kingdom is not of this world." Jesus spoke that line before Pilate, the representative of the most powerful empire of the age. Rome measured power in troops, roads, tribute, prisons, and crosses. Rome believed authority was real only when it could be enforced by visible force. Yet standing before that machine, beaten and exposed, Jesus spoke of a kingdom not founded on the same terms. He was not denying kingship. He was redefining it. He was declaring that Rome was not the highest court in existence, and that history did not end at the edge of Caesar's reach. That is why his next words strike so deeply. "You would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above." That is not the voice of a helpless victim. It is the voice of someone placing imperial power inside a larger frame. Pilate still has authority. The soldiers still have weapons. The sentence still moves toward the cross. But none of it is ultimate. None of it is self-created. None of it sits beyond the rule of God. And then comes one of the most astonishing moments in the entire Passion story. A centurion stands at the foot of the cross, a hardened officer, a professional man of violence, a servant of imperial death. He has watched bodies fail before. He knows how condemned men sound. He knows how executions end. And yet, looking at Jesus, he says, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." In that moment, the empire does not collapse, but it cracks. One of Rome's own men looks up at a crucified Jew and sees a truth greater than the system he serves. That is why the story of Jerusalem under Roman rule does not end with Rome looking strong. It ends with Rome being exposed. The soldiers were real. The taxes were crushing. The fear was constant. The humiliations were woven into daily life so deeply that people could begin to mistake oppression for the natural order of the world. And yet none of it was final. Rome could watch the temple. Rome could command the streets. Rome could stamp its image on silver, force men to carry its burdens, and nail the Son of God to a cross in full public view. But Rome could not reach high enough to claim the last word. That is the great reversal at the heart of this world. The empire that looked eternal became dust, ruins, and memory. The kingdom Jesus spoke of, the one Rome could not see or measure, outlived governors, armies, fortresses, and standards. So when you read the Gospels, remember the pressure of these streets. Remember the weight people carried in their bodies, in their homes, and in their souls. And then read the words of Jesus again. They will not sound smaller, they will sound greater. Which layer of Roman oppression shocked you most? And if you want more deeply immersive biblical history like this, subscribe to Bible History.